What can you tell us about the president and vice president's meeting with Democratic governors tonight?
Well, look, he needed to get out there and start talking to Democrats. What's remarkable is that we're almost a week after that debate. And for the first time, really, in the last 24 hours, he began talking with senior Democrats. He didn't call Hakeem Jeffries, the House Democratic leader, until last night. He didn't talk to Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer until today. And he didn't talk to the governors until this evening. And I think a lot of Democrats were quite frustrated by that. It's not just the debate itself that they've been, upset about. It's actually been how they've handled it since then. So he's trying to get out there and say, I am in it to win. Privately, though, he understands that that's not necessarily in his full control at this point, that there are, in fact, circumstances in which he might not be able to keep going forward. He knows that this interview he's going to give to George Stephanopoulos on Friday is going to be critical. He has to be able to show that he is vigorous, that he can answer the questions that people have raised. And if it doesn't go well, then we're not quite sure where things are going to go.
Eugene, you gave me one of the few laughs I have had in the past few days when you were trying to put the Politico newsletter to bed, and you said, I need newsy people to stop saying newsy things, which I think really sums up what this week has been like. So I want to know what you were hearing, both at the meeting with the governors, also the call with campaign staff, the call with donors. Is the message the same regardless of the audience?
That's what it seems to be at this point. Something that's been very true about the Biden world, folks, his inner circle for years at this point has been that they hunker down when there's chaos happening around them. They put their head down and they ignore the chattering class, as they like to say. But that is different now, right? They know that they can't do that. And that's where there's been so much frustration, as Peter just said, with Democrats across the board who are saying, we wanted to hear from you not on Friday in an interview earlier. So they are moving forward. People are, kind of accepting it as it is. But the bar is so high right now for the president to jump over. In this interview, no matter how long it's going to be, right, people are going to grade it on the way they're already feeling. He has NATO next week. So at some point, they say he's going to do a press conference and take multiple questions from multiple reporters, as they put it. And what I'm hearing from folks, the governors obviously are feeling good, but you're having House Democrats who are not always known for being calm in times of crisis, who are running around, taking letters saying that maybe the president needs to step aside, trying to get folks to sign those kinds of things, my colleagues are reporting. So there's still a lot of chaos happening, and it is up to the president, just like it was on that debate stage, right? It is up to the president to be able to change people's minds. It can't be his aides who are going to tell him, talk about what he should say, how he should phrase things. It's how he actually performs when it actually happens. And so the spotlight has never been brighter on a person who's been in political life for 50 years.
Donna, you just had Eugene name-checking congressional Democrats, so let's talk about the fact that now you have Grijalva calling on him to step down, the fact that there are letters circulating not just among frontline Dems, but potentially among other Democratic members of Congress. Pull back the curtain for us. Help us understand the calculus for these lawmakers as they decide what to do, both as individuals and as a cohort.
Well, look, I think that individual members of Congress, my former Democratic colleagues, are first concerned about their own elections and in their own states. But the reality is that there hasn't been this groundswell, yet coming. And I think the president still has an opportunity, both in an inside and outside strategy, inside with Democrats, talking to Democrats, talking directly with Democrats and not through aides and staff and assistants, but also the outside strategy, making sure that he is seen out and engaged both with voters and with these world leaders next week. I think that's going to be a really big opportunity for the president to demonstrate on a world stage that he has the capacity that he says. And I take the president at his word. He says that he's in it to win it. These governors coming out, I think, were really helpful this evening because these are straight shooters. Tim Walz is going to tell you exactly what he feels, my former colleague. And I think that their being out there really helps the president because they've been sitting in conversation with the president. But that needs to happen more and more both on the inside with electeds, but also outside with voters.
Yeah, Peter, your sense of how Democrats are reacting to this outreach from the president, from his team?
Well, I think they think it's a little late at this point, and it's not necessarily persuasive. I think at this point that the people I talked to inside the Biden circle, as well as outside the Biden circle, were more pessimistic today than they were yesterday. They've seen these polls come out that has not been encouraging for them. They have seen a lot of anger among donors who are very upset and are making clear that they're upset to the campaign and to the White House and to their Senate and House friends. And there's a lot of concern on the part of down-ballot Democrats who are worried that they're going not only to lose their seats, but lose the House. There's a lot of hope that even if the White House was not necessarily going to go Democratic, that they could still take back the House. That no longer looks as easy as it did a week ago. And I think that that is causing a lot of slippage of support. The two Democrats who have come out so far, elected Democrats so far, to say that they think he should step down are not the only ones. There are a lot of other ones that I've talked to and I know about from others who are on the fence, ready to go if, in fact, they sense the air getting out of the balloon. And so we'll see whether or not the president can keep them on board through these performances over the next few days. And if he can, obviously, he'll try to gut it out. But if not, then, we'll see.
Eugene, let's talk about that polling. I'm sure you heard it in our colleague Kelly O's report there. It's not the only poll that's coming out, but when you look at the polls in their totality, I just wonder the extent to which that is playing into the political calculus.
Yeah, I think people are looking at the polls because it's kind of the best view as to how much the debate changed things, right? Because you're hearing from Democrats who a lot of these people and has for a really long time. And so you have folks who are looking, okay, is this really changing the way that Americans are viewing this president? They haven't, when they see the polls slipping, they say that it's a problem. They're concerned by it. It's scary, right? But at the same time, something that's maybe not the best message is that, like, he was losing before. 3 points isn't that much to slip by, which is not the the where you want to be, but that's where we are, I think. And the thing that I heard from someone today was that the New York Times Siena poll was the one they were really nervous about. It's the one that was kind of being pre-spun by Jen O'Malley Dillon, a senior advisor for the president. And it was 3 points. But at the same time, if you look in that poll, you see that people think the president is too old, still think he's too old, because that's not new. That has not changed. It is unlikely to change. They are looking, you have black voters and brown voters who are still uninterested, young voters who are slipping away from him even more. So trying to gain all of that back in the time that they have is going to be extremely, extremely difficult. And there are Democrats who don't really worry about his ability to do the job of president, but for him to get out there and make the argument in order to change the fundamentals of this race.
Donna, I want you to take a listen to what Congresswoman Debbie Dingell had to say about the president's situation. This was with our colleague, Andrea Mitchell.
I want to see him talk to the American people, the working men and women of this country, and tell them why he can do the job and what he's going to deliver, and that he's got the stamina to do it. And I got in trouble for saying one news interview isn't going to do it. It's not. It's sustained.
Your thoughts?
Oh, look, I think I agree with Debbie about that. The president can't just do a one-off. He has to really put himself out there. And look, this should not be a problem for them. If the president is saying he has the capacity to do the job and he can put himself out there. He's going to be on the campaign trail over the weekend. We will get to see that. And it's not just one interview. It may be several interviews and a lot of different kinds of things over the next few weeks. Look, there's not a lot of time between now and the Democratic convention. And so whatever is going to take place, it needs to take place now. And I think a lot of folks are looking to see not just at the polls, but they also want to see the president engaged, and they want to be able to judge for themselves by seeing him.
Especially because the stakes are so high. Peter, the Biden campaign is out with this ad. It's a new ad telling voters that in light of the Supreme Court's decision on presidential immunity, it's more important than ever to keep Donald Trump out of the White House. Can you talk to me just a little bit about this duality of trying to continue those proactive attacks, that contrast, while also trying to contend with this current situation?
Yeah, I mean, this is what's really hovering over this whole conversation. It's not that Democrats don't particularly like Joe Biden. It's that they're worried about who can beat Donald Trump. And the question is, after last week's debate, can Joe Biden beat Donald Trump? And Eugene's right. It's only a slippage in some ways of 3 points compared to where it had been before the debate. But remember, the debate was actually supposed to build support, not lose support, right? Because they were already in the hole going into it. And that the whole purpose of having the debate was to reshake up the race and make things better for the president, not to put him further behind. So that's the trouble. So the question is, okay, it's a roll of the dice if you stick with Biden, but it's a roll of the dice if you don't. It's a roll of the dice if you go with somebody else other than him at this point, because we're only a few months away from the election. Could a Kamala Harris or a Gavin Newsom or a Gretchen Whitmer come in at the last minute, take over, build the kind of national presence and stature and organization to beat Donald Trump? Because in the end, that's what matters right now to these Democrats who are thinking about this question about their president, is who can beat Donald Trump.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.